let's talk about the newest launch from Ensley Cosmetics. It is the Flutter and Flourish collection. So there are 2 eyeshadow palettes. They're launching blushes. There's also 4 single eyeshadows, 6 loose pigments, and 2 lip glosses. I am wearing one of them on the lips. I will be showing you what those look like. I'm also wearing one of the blushes on the cheek, and I will send all these products in PR from Ensley. So thank you so much for sending it over to me, and I'm also an affiliate with the brand, so I do have a code with the brand, and thank you so much if you do use my code. Into the details, this collection is launching July 30th at 12:30 p.m. PST. I'm happy to see some smaller palettes from Ensley. These are going to be $50 for the Flutter, and Flourish is $55 plus a code, so that will take it down a couple of dollars. So let's take a look at these palettes. First up is the Flutter palette. I love this color story. It is definitely a more kind of pastel grungy type of color story, a little bit more leaning towards fall, maybe kind of like a grungy spring. There's 6 shimmers in here, and they're all very beautiful, dimensional, shifty or duochrome kind of shades. There's kind of 2 different textures in here. Pixie Petal is a little bit more on the flaky side, while Mystic Meadow and Moonflower and Golden Hour are on the smoother side. And then the Flourish palette, similar kind of a layout. So we have alternating mattes and shimmers. Again, 6 shimmers in here, predominantly pretty smooth shimmers. The only really 2 shades that are slightly flaky, but they do smooth out, especially if you use a finger, is Sunbeam and Fairy Flutter. And then Garden Glow, Buttercup Bliss, and Dahlia Magic, as well as Nectar, are very, very smooth. And they do vary just slightly in the level of opacity. So some of them are a little bit more topper-like, and some of them are a little bit more opaque. Same goes for the 4 single eyeshadows. They do not come in this empty palette. The palette is from Cosmetics, and I will link it down in the description box. And these are definitely slightly more textured, especially this pink shade right here. And a couple of the shades do feel squishy, not just only in the palette, but also in the single eyeshadows. And I will be going through that when I go through the detail swatches of the shimmers, which I will be actually not doing each shimmer separately. I will be kind of grouping them together for like 3 or 4 at a time, because there is just so much in this collection to swatch, so I have to spare my hands a little bit. And then we have the 6 loose pigments, and then the blushes. There is a beautiful peachy shade, which I'm wearing on the cheeks right now, and then the Flourish shade is a magenta, and then of course the 2 lip glosses. These do seem like a different formula from the previous lip gloss that I tried from them that was in a skinnier, thinner tube. These are pretty thick and opaque side. So let's get into some detail swatches of all the shimmers, then some comparison swatches, and then I'll look with each of the palettes, and then I will give you some of my first impression thoughts at the end of the video. So let's get right into it. As I mentioned, I will be grouping these. So top is Shattered Wings, then Monarch, then Whispering Widow, and then Hibiscus, and then Whispering Widow. Hibiscus is a little bit flaky, however, it does smooth out, and it does feel squishy and wet to the touch. It feels a little bit thicker than the shade above it, the orange. That one is also definitely more putty-like. It's almost a little bit sticky, so it does spread out a bit, but definitely something to keep in mind. If you have hooded, oily lids, you might experience some issues. The top shade does not feel squishy or anything like that. And the orange, as you can see, it has just a little bit of a shift to a brighter yellowy orange, but it's not necessarily shifty. And the top shade has a little bit of a shift to a pale blue, just a tad. And then the bottom shade is not necessarily fully a black base multichrome, but it is definitely more of a jeweled tone. The top row shimmers from the Flutter palette: Pixie Petal at the top, then Golden Hour, and then Moonflower. Pixie Petal is the most flaky shade, especially if you look at it in the pan, but it does completely smooth out because it is quite putty-like, very squishy. Golden Hour and Moonflowers feel similar in a sense that they're quite smooth and they apply super, super easily. And all of these shades are quite shifty. Pixie Petal is like a cool toned purple, shifting to yellow green, to a little bit of orange as well. And Golden Hour is just so special. It's really, really interesting, beautiful dark teal base with a pink flash and a lime green and yellow shift in there. Super, super dimensional. And then Moonflower is definitely a shade that we've seen many, many times. It is such a staple shade, brown base to it that's a little bit more on the opaque side, with a flash of green straight on and a shift to purple. The next row is Dewdrop, Sylph, and Mystic Meadow. Dewdrop flashes green straight on, but it has a purple blue base. Really stunning kind of shade, and also very smooth. Sylph is just a little bit more flaky, but completely smooths out and is not squishy. This one has a yellowy orange base to it with a blue flash. shifting to purple. And then lastly, Mystic Meadow has just a little bit of lighter brown, yellowish brown base that flashes green and shifts to purple. It is a little bit similar to Moonflower in a sense because of the similar base as well as the flash of green. First row of the Flourish palette, Nectar, then Buttercup Bliss, then Sunbeam. Nectar is such a beautiful shade. It has a really bright orange base to it with a blue flash shifting to a pink purple. Buttercup Bliss is a yellow that has a pink flash to it and it shifts to a super bright yellow. I think the base isn't too obvious, definitely something that could be sheared out. And then Sunbeam is a bright orange with a peach and a little bit of green as well, and this shade is a little bit more textured and also squishy. Bottom row, Dahlia, Magic, Garden Glow, and Fairy Flutter. Dahlia is a really bright, almost neon magenta shifting to peach yellow at a harsh angle. Garden Glow has a little bit of a yellow base to it that is only really seen at certain angles, but this one flashes really bright neon green, shifting to blue, to ultraviolet, like purple indigo. Super beautiful shade, very dimensional. I feel like this one is interesting because once it's swatched out, I think it looks just a little bit different than it does in the pan. Like you can really see the green more as a flash versus looking like it's kind of the base in the pan. And then Fairy Flutter is the flakiest shade in here. It's also squishy. This one has a vibrant pink flash straight on. It has a little bit of a darker base to it that you can see on the edges. Not quite fully black base, but definitely like a grayish base if you were to blend it out. And this one shifts to yellow, orange, green. It kind of reminds me of Adept Cosmetics Zor-El from the, oh my gosh, I forget the name of the palette. It is long discontinued now, but it's very similar to that one. Loose pigments. First is Gaia's Gaze, and then Moonlit Garden, and then Fairy Glow. I think Gaia's Gaze and Fairy Meadow look extremely similar. Not only do they have almost the same exact base, but they do both flash green straight on, and then they do shift a bit differently. So Fairy Meadow does shift more to like a purpley, almost magenta, versus Gaia's Gaze is to a blue indigo, but very similar. And then Moonlit Garden is a very dimensional shade. It's got pink, gold, green flecks throughout it. And the other three loose pigments are Fluttering Fantasy, Honeysuckle, and Daffodil. Fluttering Fantasy is actually really interesting because it looks like an iridescent, but once it's swatched out, especially this way it's a little bit more opaque, it looks like the kind of multi-chrome that we see that has a almost teal base to it with a pink flash straight on, and it shifts to yellow to green. Honeysuckle is a beautiful, really bright coral shade shifting to orange and yellow gold. Maybe a little bit of green at a really harsh angle. And then Daffodil is a really bright yellow. I think it looks a little bit chartreusey, just a little bit. But this one, I don't really see too much of a shift. Maybe just it goes to a lighter yellow. Be using the Flourish palette for the first look using Begonias. I'm just gonna put that right into this inner corner section. I'm pretty much gonna try to use all of the mattes. Next, taking Flourish right next to that. Gonna be a very colorful look. Then Pink Paradise right next to that, just a little bit more. Thistle on this outer corner. Just gonna build up a little bit more. And I'm gonna go back in with Pink Paradise and just further blend that into the rest of the mats. And then taking Petal Pop underneath the lower lash line on this outer corner. It's so vibrant. Taking Clionadh and just deepening up the outer corner. Just a tad right in here. And I am going to bring it underneath my lower lash line just a little bit to just help connect the two. And then just putting on a bit more. Picked up a little bit of Thistle and I'm just going to help blend this out further. Picked up Fairy Flutter and it's just going to go right here on the kind of bridge in between my lid and the outer corner. Just want a little bit of it. That is super, super shiny. Then taking Sunbeam right next to that. And then on the inner corner, I'm going to use Buttercup Bliss. Just using my pinky still. Oh, that is so, so pretty. And here's the finished look. Onto the Flutter palette, I picked up Orchard Orange. And I'm just going to pop that on this inner corner. Just really pack it on. It's definitely more of a pastel and it takes a bit of building up. And I'm going to take that about halfway. And then picking up Serenity right next to that. And just taking it across halfway of the lid and then a little bit underneath the lower lash line. Picking up Wisp. I'm just going to put that really close to my lash line. And I'm just going to blend that into the outer corner and underneath my lower lash line. This is the Refer 13 Mini. And I'm just going to slowly work it into the green. I think these two create such an interesting color blend together. I feel like this shade feels a bit powdery, so it's almost like not fully opaque. I kind of want to smoke it out a little bit more. So I'm just going to go in with a tiny bit more just to keep it layered on there, and then just blending it in a triangular shape. And then I'm gonna take a little bit of Echo and just press it really close to my lash line. Just really smoking this out. Right out here. And then again, going in with this brush, I'm actually gonna pick up a little bit of Serenity. And I'm just gonna blend that all together. Then I'm going to go back in with this brush and whatever's left on it. I'm just going to further kind of create a little bit of a wing. For the shimmer, I want something pretty translucent because I just want to put it over here on the lid mainly. So as much as I really want to use Golden Hour, I think I'm going to save it for real. And I'm just going to go in with Mystic Meadow. I feel like this is going to layer nicely even over the orange. Oh yeah, this just looks really wet. I'm just gonna put a little bit more on, but this is super, super sheer. Has a green or reflect with some blue in there. And here's the finished look. So onto my first impression thoughts. I'm definitely pretty familiar with the Ensley formula. Please stay tuned for my monthly palette ranking to hear my more thorough thoughts on the palettes once I've tried them out a little bit more. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do more looks in this video, but just getting right into them. The Flourish palette, really bright and colorful. I love the shimmers in here, especially. I think Nectar, Buttercup Bliss, and Garden Glow are just so, so stunning. And I had a really hard time finding a shimmer shadow similar to Nectar in my collection, which I have over, I should probably count, but over 600 single eyeshadows the last time I did count, and I did a single eyeshadow collection. So definitely a very special kind of shimmer shadow in here. They're very, very beautiful metallic. Sunbeam and Fairy Flutter, unfortunately, are on the squishier side. Especially Sunbeam, it just feels a little bit more on the creamy side, so I will have to be very, very careful with this one, as I do have hooded oily lids, so I do get creasing. pretty often. It's very common for me, and I don't really mind it as long as it doesn't happen within like the first 30 minutes of wearing the eyeshadow. I don't mind at all tapping out my eyeshadow throughout the day if I'm wearing it for a longer period of time. Definitely something to consider if you're thinking about getting either one of these palettes. As for the mattes, I have no complaints in terms of how they perform. I did use all 6 mattes, but definitely have to try them out even further. They are harder pressed, and the brighter shades in the palette are definitely more buildable, but I think that they performed and they blended together really nicely. I do want to try them out on different eyeshadow primers for sure. And then the Flutter palette, this is definitely my favorite color story between the two palettes. I just feel really inspired looking at the palette. I think some of these shimmers are spectacular, really beautiful. I think some of them are a little bit similar. Really, these 3 shades, they do flash differently. They do have a different level of base to them. However, they're, I think, just a little bit too similar to have all 3 of them in here. And then Golden Hour is so beautiful. I had a really hard time finding a similar shadow in my collection. Pixie Petal is the flakiest shade in here, and it is a little bit on the squishy side. So again, hooded oily lids, I'm gonna have to be careful with that one, but I don't really feel like I'm gonna gravitate towards this shimmer specifically in this palette a lot. I definitely think I'm more of like these kinds of shimmers, and then this one, which is really interesting. And I just love the tones in here. And again, similar to the bright mattes in the previous palette, I think some of the pastel shades in here are definitely more on the buildable side. They did layer really nicely as well as blend, so no complaints there. Moving on to the blushes, this is purely just a personal preference. I do prefer to use cream blushes. I just find them easier to work with and just be able to really control just how much I'm putting on. So that's just, again, really just such a personal preference. There's nothing wrong with these. So far, I've only tried Flutter on the cheeks, but it did pick up pretty nicely on the brush, so I felt like I had to tap it off a little bit. Onto the lip glosses. These are very opaque. I was actually a little bit surprised how opaque, especially the Flourish shade. I mean, it just flashes green, so it looks like kind of you have like multi-chrome green lips, which is really fun, but not something I would wear necessarily every day. Also, it is a thicker formula, so it's going to last really well on your lips. However, it's going to be harder to wipe off if you want to. I had a hard time trying to wipe this off. The pigment just kind of stuck down on my lips, and I had to actually use a makeup remover to remove it. I do definitely lean towards the Flutter lip gloss a little bit more. It is super fun. Would be really interesting over a darker matte lip as well. Not personally for me for every day, but I think especially like Halloween time, those could be really fun. And then as for the single eyeshadows, there are a couple of squishy shades, so these 2 right here definitely on the squishy side, so I would have to be extremely careful. Use the tissue paper technique so I can use these a little bit more. Out of all 4 of these, I do prefer this one right here, Shattered Wings. It is a very beautiful neutral kind of shadow for everyday, kind of like a one and done eyeshadow. So these are really nice, but I haven't used these, so I can't really say much about them, but stay tuned. I definitely want to feature these in a reel. And then as for the loose pigments, I just don't really gravitate towards loose pigments. I just think they're just a little bit too messy for like every day. If I get up at 6:30 in the morning to get ready for work, I just not really something I will gravitate towards. That being said, they do really look just so beautiful. They have like a special kind of look to them that I find is different from pressed single shadows. So I would definitely recommend any of those shades that you see yourself wearing if you are into loose eyeshadows. So those are some of my initial thoughts on this collection. Let me know in the comments below if you're picking up anything from this collection. I would love to hear your thoughts. And that's everything for this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time.